For 9 years, Faye Coleman cleaned other people's houses by the hour and never kept a thing that wasn't hers. Not a coin from a couch cushion, not a pill bottle, not a watch, not the loose 20s people left on dressers to test her. She was paid $14.25 an hour by an agency that took its cut first. The mop she carried in the trunk of a 2004 Corolla had cost her $9 at a hardware store on Spring Grove, and she had owned it longer than some marriages last. But the man whose house she was sent to clean on a cold Tuesday in March had once built a company that shipped cabinets to 31 states, and in 11 days he would have no house at all. What she did next would empty a will that 2 people thought was settled, break a silence between a brother and a sister, and put a name back on a workshop door that had stayed blank for 14 years. She did not know any of that yet. She only knew the address, 41 Wayteen Belmore, a big brick house in a part of Cincinnati where the lawns were edged like the grass had been to barber school. Faye was 58. She woke most mornings at 4:50 before the radiator in the apartment on Coleraine even started to knock. She woke that early because Junie woke at 6, and the 40 minutes in between were the only 40 minutes of the day that belonged to nobody but Faye. She slid the satin bonnet off her head and set the coffee going and drank it black, because milk was for Junie's cereal and the math of a gallon was the math of a week. She packed Junie's lunch the night before so the morning would have one less decision in it. A turkey sandwich cut on the diagonal, a square of cornbread wrapped in foil, because Junie believed at 7 that triangles tasted better than squares, and Faye had decided long ago that a child should get to be right about something. Junie was her granddaughter. Faye's daughter Renee had been gone 3 years. People said gone the way they say it when they don't want to say the other word, and Faye let them, because correcting them cost more than it was worth. Renee had left Junie the way some people leave a coat on a chair, meaning to come back, and then the night got long and they never did. Faye did not tell the story to people. The story was hers, and Junie's, and it was not for the break room. What she told people was the simple part. My granddaughter lives with me. She is 7. She is the smartest person in our building, and the building has 41 units. Sunday mornings she still did Junie's hair before church, parted it into rows and worked the braids down tight. 3 beads at the end of each one, the child wincing and Faye saying hush the way her own mother had said it over her own scalp 40 years before in Avondale. They went to a small Baptist church off Rockdale, where Faye had sung alto in the choir as a girl, and now mostly just stood in the 3rd pew and let the music do to her what it had always done. She had not had time to sing in years, but the songs had gone down into her somewhere below the place words live, and they came up when she needed them, which she would not understand the full weight of until a cold morning the following spring. The day went like most days. The 17 bus at 6:40, 3 stops, then a transfer she usually walked instead, 11 minutes up a hill because the transfer cost extra and 11 minutes was free. The agency was called Brightwell Home Services, and it sent her to 4 houses on a long day and 2 on a short one, and the houses taught her, the way they always had, that money does a strange thing to a person's eyes. It teaches them to look through the help the way you look through a screen door. She had stood 18 inches from a woman in Hyde Park who took a call about her own divorce and never lowered her voice, because Faye, kneeling at the baseboard with a rag, was furniture. She had cleaned a guest room for a family who'd just buried someone and found, under the bed, a man's slippers placed neatly side by side, waiting, and she had dusted around them and not moved them an inch, because some things are not yours to tidy. She had learned which medicine cabinets held what, which marriages were ending, which children weren't speaking to which parents, and she had never repeated one word of any of it. Not because she was a saint, because she remembered what her mother told her in a kitchen in Avondale with linoleum worn down to the black, the year Faye turned 11. Her mother had come up from Georgia after the war with a suitcase and a church fan, and a way of humming low while she worked, and that morning she was scrubbing a pot that was already clean, humming a song with no words Faye knew the name of. You don't get to choose who you're kind to, her mother said. She did not stop scrubbing. You just choose to be the kind that shows up. Faye had carried that sentence for 47 years. She had tested it against every reason not to. It held. It held even when it cost her, which it did, often in small amounts that added up the way small amounts do. There was a new girl at Brightwell that winter, Tasha, 22, fast and frightened, who had a baby at home and a supervisor named Dell who counted mistakes the way some men count change. One Thursday Tasha cracked a client's ceramic dish, a thing with a price on it that would have come out of 2 days' pay, and she stood in that kitchen the color of paper, and Faye took the pieces out of her hands and said, I'll tell Dell I did it. I've been here 9 years. He'll grumble and forget. You've been here 9 weeks. He'll remember. Tasha tried to argue and Faye said the thing that ended arguments. Go check on your baby on your break. I've got this. It cost Faye $41 off her own check and a lecture she let roll off her. She did not tell anyone. There was no line on the timesheet for it. And there was the unpaid kind, the kind nobody asked for. An old woman in Westwood, Mrs. Pole 86, alone, house was on Faye's Tuesday route for 2 hours every week and who Faye stayed with for closer to 3 because the work took 2 and the woman took the third. A cup of tea. The mail brought in, the pills lined up in the little plastic days of the week so Mrs. Pole wouldn't take Tuesdays on a Thursday. Faye was not paid for the third hour. She had never once written it down. When Mrs. Pole pressed a folded 10 into her hand at the door, Faye took it, because refusing it would have made the woman feel like a burden, and then Faye left the 10 in the sugar tin on her way out, where Mrs. Pole would find it and think she'd misremembered. That was the arithmetic Faye was good at. Not the kind that added up. The kind that came out even in a place you couldn't see. That arithmetic had a beginning, though Faye rarely went back to it. 14 years before that Tuesday in March, Faye had worked nights, not cleaning then. She was an aide at a long-term care place off Reading Road, 8 cents an hour. The overnight shift nobody wanted, 11 at night to 7 in the morning. She did the work the day staff didn't have time for. She turned people so they wouldn't get sores. She changed sheets at 3 a.m. without turning the lights all the way up, because she knew the dark was kinder to a body that hurt. She knew which residents called out for a husband 40 years dead, and which ones just wanted the window cracked 2 inches. And sometimes, when someone was at the end of it, she sat. She wasn't paid to sit. There was no line on the timesheet for it. But there were nights when a person was leaving the world, and the family was 3 states away or asleep or simply not there, and Faye had decided again to be the kind that shows up. She would pull the hard plastic chair to the bed and take the hand and hum. Not hymns exactly. The songs her mother hummed over that clean pot. Old church songs from a Georgia she had never seen. Low, the kind you hum, not the kind you sing so it wouldn't wake the hall. There was one she never forgot. A young woman, maybe 31, in the bed by the window. The chart said a name Faye barely registered through the long blur of nights, and after she could never quite call it back. She knew her as the woman in the room by the window. The woman had a straight back even then, even at the end, propped on the pillows like good posture was the last thing the body forgets. There were no visitors on Faye's shift. There was a card on the nightstand, a man's blunt handwriting, that said only back Saturday. Hold on, Dad. Faye had her for talk much by then. On the last night she opened her eyes once and looked at Faye and her mouth moved and Faye leaned in but no sound came, only breath. Faye held the hand. She hummed until 4:47 when the breathing changed and then until it stopped and then a while after that, because a hand does not stop being a hand the second the person lets go of it. Faye told no one she had stayed. There was no one to tell who would have understood it as anything but a shift running long. She clocked out at 7:02. She went home and slept 4 hours and woke up and made arithmetic out of a Friday in November that the bank had circled. Because by then her husband had been gone 2 years, and the property taxes on the little house on Beekman had been quietly drowning her, and the bank had sent a letter with a date on it and a number, 11,206 house. That was what it would take to keep the house. She did not have $11,206. She did not thousand. She had begun in the privacy of her own head to make peace with the loss the way you make peace with weather. She had started pricing apartments. She had practiced, in the mirror, the face she would make for Renee, who was 17 then and still hers, so the girl wouldn't see how close to the edge they were standing. Then a padded envelope came, no return address. Inside was a money order for $11,002, the number exact, down to the dollar, which she could not explain and stopped trying to. And inside, wrapped in a square of green felt, was a small wooden box. The box was walnut. Faye didn't know walnut then. She knows it now after years of dusting it in other people's houses, learning the names of woods the way you learn the names of a rich man's dogs. It fit in 2 hands. The grain ran across the lid like water under ice. The corners were joined with little interlocking fingers, fit so tight you couldn't have slid a hair into the seam. Dovetails, a cabinet maker would have called them. Hand cut. The work of someone who had been taught that a thing made right outlives the man who made it. Inside, lined with felt the color of moss, and on the bottom, branded into the wood, 2 letters and a date, B&S and a day in October. She kept the house. She never found out who sent the envelope. She decided after a year of wondering who, wondering why, wondering if it was a mistake meant for someone else and she was a thief without knowing it. That wondering was a kind of debt she couldn't afford to keep paying, and she put it down. But she kept the box. Junie's first lost tooth was in it now, and a button off Renee's coat, and a key to a door that no longer existed. The box sat on the shelf above the radiator, and most days Faye didn't see it any more than the rich saw her. That was the woman the agency sent to 4118 Belmore. They told her, deep clean, the family's selling, just get it presentable, and there might be an older gentleman around, don't mind him. Faye said all right. She always said all right. She did not know that the older gentleman had built the box. She did not know she had hummed his daughter out of the world. Walter Banks was 79 years old, and he had made things with his hands his whole life, until the year his hands and his name were taken from him by two people who shared his blood. He had started with nothing, which is a phrase people use loosely, but in Walter's case it was close to literal. His father had come up from Kentucky in 1951. A Finnish carpenter with a toolbox, a bad lung, and a careful man's hope that a black craftsman could make a living in a city that didn't always want to pay for the proof. He found the work where men like him found work then, the jobs nobody else wanted, the trim and the cabinetry the big firms wouldn't dirty their hands on, and he did it so clean that contractors who would not shake his hand still asked for him by name. He died at 54 owing more than he owned. The one thing Walter left him was a sentence, and a way of holding a chisel, and the sentence was, measure it twice. A thing made right outlives the man who made it. Walter had been 19 at the funeral. He spent the rent money on a set of bench chisels the same week, which his mother never forgave and never let him forget, and he sharpened them on a stone for an hour every Sunday for the next 60 years, because his father's other lesson, the unspoken one, was that you take care of the thing that takes care of you. He built Banks & Sons out of a two-bay garage in Camp Washington in 1968. There were no sons. The name was Hope, or maybe just the sound of a thing built to last, and maybe it was his father's name finally getting to mean something more than a debt. Cabinets first, then built-ins, then the kind of millwork that goes into banks and courthouses and the dining rooms of people who will never know your name. By 1991, he had 41 employees and a shop floor you could eat off of and contracts in 31 states. He paid his people on the 15th and the 30th, and he never once missed a payroll, not in the recession, not when he had to take a second mortgage to make it, which he did, twice. There was a man named Earl who ran the spray booth for 26 years, and whose son's college Walter paid for and never mentioned, and a foreman named Dottie, the first woman on the floor, who Walter put there in 1983 over the objection of every man on the line, because she could read a cut list faster than any of them, and Walter's father had taught him to measure twice, and not to measure people by the wrong stick. On payday afternoons, half the floor walked over together to the barber shop on Coleraine, and Walter went too, in his sawdust cuffs, and sat in the chair and listened, because a man learns more about his own shop in a barber's chair than he ever does in his own office. He had a wife named Eleanor, who he met at a hardware counter buying the wrong size hinge, and who corrected him, and who he married 14 months later in the same church his mother had joined the week she got off the bus from Kentucky. Eleanor kept the books for the first decade and the truth for all of it. She died in 1998, in the spring, of the thing that takes people fast and leaves the house too quiet. After that, Walter had the work, and he had Claire. Claire was his daughter and his only child. She had her mother's straight back and a laugh that started before the joke was finished. She did the books for the company for a while and was better at it than Walter, and she had a way of putting a number in front of him that he didn't want to see and waiting, not arguing, just waiting until he saw it. He used to come in early just to find her already there at the desk by the window with 2 coffees, one set across from her for him. Before he'd said he was coming, she'd say, "Sit down, Pop, you're going to want to be sitting," and he would sit, and she would be right. There is a particular grief in remembering someone who was always right, because the world keeps presenting you with the moments she'd have caught. When Claire got sick, Walter was 65, and the company was in the worst year it had ever had. A supplier had collapsed and taken $500,000 in deposits down with it, and there was a lawsuit, and 41 families' paychecks were sitting on the outcome. Walter did the thing he had always done. He went to the problem. He flew to a deposition in another state on a Thursday, because the lawyer said his being there mattered, and it did, and he told himself Claire stable. The doctors had used the word stable, and he would be back Saturday. He wrote her a card before he left in his blunt carpenter's hand, and propped it on the nightstand where she'd see it. Back Saturday. Hold on, Dad. The breathing changed on Friday. He landed Saturday morning and drove straight there, and she was already gone, 11 hours gone, and a nurse with kind eyes met him in the hall and told him a thing he would carry like a stone in his coat for the rest of his life. She wasn't alone, the nurse said. One of the night aides sat with her, sat the whole night, both nights, more than she had to, held her hand and hummed to her. Old church songs, sounded like. We don't always get someone like that. Your daughter had someone like that. Walter said thank you. He went home. He poured a drink and did not drink it. He sat in the dark of the shop he'd built, with the smell of sawdust and oil that had meant home for 40 years, and he understood, in a way that did not soften over time but only sharpened, that a stranger had done the thing he had not. A stranger had shown up. And he had been in a conference room with a legal pad, being right about 41 paychecks, which was a true and decent thing to be doing, and was also, on that particular Friday, the wrong place for a father to be, and both of those things would be true forever and would never cancel each other out. He tried to find her. He called the facility. The woman had left the job, they said. They couldn't give out information. He understood, of course, privacy. He pushed as far as a grieving man with money can push, which is further than most. He hired a man to look quietly for a recently departed overnight aide in financial trouble within 50 miles, and the man came back with 3 names, 3 women who had worked nights and left and were going under in the ordinary American way. Walter could not know which, if any, was the one who had sat with Claire. So he did the thing a man does when he cannot fix the right thing and cannot bear to fix nothing. He chose the one whose trouble had the clearest number on it, a foreclosure, $11,206, and he sent the exact sum, anonymous, no note, because he did not trust himself to write one that wouldn't somehow be about him. And because money felt like a coward's gift, even to him, he went out to his bench one night, the good bench, his father's bench, and he made a walnut from a board he'd been saving 11 years for something he couldn't name. He cut the dovetails by hand, the way the machines couldn't, the way that says someone's time is in this. He lined it with green felt. He branded the bottom the way he branded everything that left his shop, B&S, and under it he put the date. Claire's date, the Friday he hadn't made it back, October's number burned into the wood so that whoever held it would be holding. Without knowing, the worst day of his life turned into the only kind of monument he knew how to build. He didn't know what the box was for. A place to keep something small, he supposed. He sent it with the money and never knew if it arrived, and never let himself wonder long, because wondering was a door he had to keep shut to stay standing. He told himself it was settled. He told himself a sentence he would repeat for 14 years, to his brother, to his sister, to the mirror. Money is the only apology that doesn't argue back. It was the wrongest thing he ever believed, and it was the most expensive. Russell Banks was Walter's younger brother by 6 years, and he had spent most of those years standing slightly behind Walter's shoulder, in a way that looked like loyalty and felt, to Russell, like a line he was always at the back of. Russell had run sales for Banks & Sons since 1979. He was good at it, better than Walter if anyone had asked Russell, which over 40 years no one quite had. He was the one who could talk a contractor up $40,000 and have him grateful for the privilege. He was the one at the trade shows and the steak dinners, while Walter stayed back at the bench getting sawdust in his cuffs. But sales is not the name on the door, and the name on the door was their father's word for Walter, never for him. Russell had married twice and divorced twice and put both settlements on the company's back, quietly. The way you slide a debt under a rug you tell yourself you'll lift later. Gail was the youngest, the sister, 15 years behind Walter, young enough that Walter had carried her on his shoulders at their father's grave. By the time she was old enough to matter to the family business had become Walter, and Gail had decided early that the way to win was not to compete with that but to manage it. She married a man with a real estate license and a soft handshake, and she became the one who handled things. Paperwork, arrangements. The practical side, she called it, in a voice that made practical sound like love. She was not cruel. This is the part people get wrong about how houses get taken. She genuinely believed she was the responsible one. She had told herself a story in which she was the only adult left standing, and in that story everything she did was tidying. When Eleanor died, the family closed ranks around Walter for a season. When Claire died, something in Walter went quiet that never fully came back. He kept the shop running, kept measuring twice, but he stopped coming in early, because there was no longer anyone at the desk by the window with a second coffee. Russell and Gail, watching, each came to a private conclusion. They never said to each other, but both acted on. The conclusion was, he's done. The grief broke something. The decisions are ours now. We're only doing what he can't. They started small, the way it always starts small. A signature here, because Walter's hands shook now and it was easier. A document there, because the lawyer, their lawyer, though Walter didn't parse the difference, said it was prudent. A power of attorney signed at a kitchen table on an afternoon, when Walter was 76 and tired and grateful for anyone willing to handle it, because handling it was the thing he no longer had the heart for. Gail slid the pages across and said, "This just lets us help you with the boring parts, Walt." And Walter, who had read every contract that came through his shop for 50 years and caught the ones that tried to nickel him, signed this one without reading it, because it was family, and family was the one place he had decided, long ago, that you didn't have to measure twice. Russell took the company. He'll say to this day that he saved it, and there is a version of the story where that is even partly true, because the company had been adrift since Claire, and Russell did keep the lights on. Gail took the house. The deed quietly moved. The way deeds move when one person reads this document and another person trusts. She called it estate planning. She said it to Walter, slow and warm, the way you say a thing to someone you've decided is already half gone. What neither of them planned on was that Walter was not gone. He was old, and his memory came and went like a tide, sharp at dawn and foggy by 4. But on the sharp mornings, he knew exactly what had happened to him. And the knowing had nowhere to go because the documents were signed and the lawyers were theirs, and the only sentence he had left was a sentence he'd taught them himself, watching it now turned around and aimed back at his own chest. Words are free, Russell liked to say. That's why they're worthless. He'd learned it from Walter, who'd learned it from a Friday in October he could never take back. The Tuesday Faye came. It was 38 degrees and spitting a rain that couldn't commit to being snow. The big house on Belmore was already half empty. Gail had movers coming and was staging the rest for a March listing, and she wanted it spotless underneath the emptiness, the way you want a thing clean before you sell it to someone who will never know who lived there. Faye let herself in with the agency code and started in the kitchen the way she always did because a kitchen tells you who a house was. This one told her almost nothing. The cabinets were beautiful. She noticed that, ran a thumb along a door that shut with a sound like a held breath, the soft even click of a hinge set by someone who cared whether you'd hear it slam. The counters were bare and the drawers were lined with paper that had never been used, and the whole place had the held still quality of a room nobody had cried in for a long time or had cried in alone. She found the man in the back bedroom. He was sitting in a wooden chair by a window, in a cardigan, with no blanket, and the radiator in that room was off. His hands were folded in his lap, big hands, scarred across the knuckles, a carpenter's hands gone thin, and he was looking out at the rain like it was a program he was only half watching. He was very thin. There was a tray on the floor by his chair with a sandwich on it, untouched, the bread gone stiff at the corners. Faye stood in the doorway. She did not say, "Excuse me." She did not say, "I'm just here to clean." She crossed the room and put 2 fingers on the radiator and found it stone cold, and she turned the valve until it ticked and began slowly to warm, and then she picked up the tray. "You don't have to eat it if it's gone hard," she said. "I'll make you something hot. You like eggs?" The man turned his head slowly. His eyes found her and stayed, which she was not used to. People did not usually let their eyes stay. "I haven't been asked what I like in some time," he said. His voice was sandpaper and good manners. Eggs would be a kindness. She made him eggs. She found 2 in the back of an otherwise gutted refrigerator and a heel of butter, and she made them soft the way you make them for someone whose teeth or whose strength you're not sure of, and she cut a slice of the bread and toasted it, and brought it to him on the tray and pulled the other chair over and sat while he ate, because eating alone is its own kind of cold. That was when Gail came in. Gail was 54 and dressed like a listing photo, and she looked at Faye sitting in the chair and something crossed her face that she put away quickly. "You're the cleaner," she said. It was not a question. "There's no need to fuss with him. He's being moved Friday. There's a place that has a bed. Just clean around him." She smiled. It was a smile with the temperature of the radiator before Faye turned it on. "It's all arranged, you understand." Faye understood a great deal in that moment. She understood the cold room and the hard bread and the bare house. She understood the word moved, which is a word for furniture. She understood that a place that has a bed was a sentence built to be incurious about its own ending. And she understood, watching Gail not quite look at the old man, that she was in a house where a person had been turned into a problem, and that the problem was scheduled for Friday. She stood up. She stood for 9 seconds without saying anything, holding the tray, her back straight, her eyes dry. 9 seconds is a long time when no one is talking. Gail's smile thinned at the edges. "Yes, ma'am," Faye said finally. "I understand." She did not understand it the way Gail meant, but she had learned over 30 years that the most useful thing you can do with a person who has already decided is to let them keep thinking they've won, and then go do the right thing where they can't see it. She cleaned the house. She cleaned it well because the work was the work, and she did not punish a floor for what a daughter did to a father. And the whole time she cleaned, she did arithmetic in the back of her head, the survival arithmetic she'd been doing her whole life. The math of a second mouth, the math of a couch that pulled out, the math of 14.25 an hour and a rent of $740 against a thing that had no price on it at all. The numbers did not work. The numbers had never worked, not once, not the night in November 14 years ago, and she had kept the house anyway, because somebody she never met had decided to be the kind that shows up. By the time she left at 6, she had decided. She did not announce it. She just knew, the way she'd known at 4:47 in a room by a window 14 years before, that there are moments when showing up is not a feeling. It's a thing you do with your hands and your car keys. 3 floors of one life were stacked on top of each other, and none of them knew it yet. In the back bedroom, an old man who had once sent a box into the dark sat warm for the first time in a week, and did not know the woman who'd turned on his heat was the same woman whose house his money had saved. Across town, on a shelf above a knocking radiator, a walnut box held a child's first tooth, and the bottom of it read B&S and a date in October, and the woman who owned it had stopped asking who'd sent it 9 years ago. And in an office downtown, a brother and a sister had a closing scheduled, and a bed reserved, and a story they told themselves about mercy, and neither of them had gone looking through the old shop files for the one document Walter Brandt signed before his hands began to shake. Back when his mind was a blade and his daughter was alive. The document that would, in 11 days, turn the whole thing over like a board you flip to find the grain runs the other way. Faye went back Wednesday and Thursday, on her own time after the agency hours, and she brought a thermos and she sat with him. She told Gail she'd stay till the move was sorted, and Gail was glad to have the problem handled, the way she was always glad to have a problem handled, and did not ask what sorted meant to a woman like Faye. Walter talked, the way the very old and the very lonely talk when someone finally holds still long enough. He talked about wood. He told her how you can read a board's whole life in its end grain, the dry years tight and the wet years wide, a drought you could put your finger on from 40 years after the tree forgot it. He told her his father's sentence about measuring twice. He told her about Earl in the spray booth and Dottie the foreman, names that meant nothing to Faye and everything to him, the roll call of a life he was the last one keeping. He told her about the barber shop on Coleraine and the men who used to walk over on payday, half of them gone now, the chairs filled with strangers. He did not at first talk about the thing underneath. People circle the deep water. They put a foot in. It came out Thursday night late. Walter had a cup of tea going cold in his two big ruined hands, and he was looking at the dark window, and he started talking and did not stop. I had a daughter, he said. Faye did not say anything. She had learned that the worst thing you can do to a person finally telling the truth is to help. Claire. He said the name like he was setting something fragile down on a high shelf. She got sick, and there was a problem at the company. 41 people. I told myself 41 people. I went to a deposition in another state. The lawyer said I had to be there, and maybe I did. I've turned it over 1,000 times, and I still don't know. And the breathing changed while I was gone. The tea steamed thinly between his hands. A nurse told me she wasn't alone. Some woman from the night shift sat with her, both nights, held her hand, sang to her, the nurse said, old church songs. A stranger did that. A stranger did the one thing He stopped. He set the cup down on the windowsill with the great care of a man who has dropped things. I never found her. I tried. I sent money where I thought she might be. I sent something, a box. I made it myself. I didn't know what else to do with my hands, and I told myself that settled it. I've said it for 14 years. Money is the only apology that doesn't argue back. He turned and looked at Faye then, and his eyes were wet but his face was steady. The way grief sounds in a kitchen at midnight, and not the way it sounds in a movie. It argues back, he said. It's been arguing back the whole time. I just couldn't hear it over the sound of being right. Faye sat very still. Something had gone cold and very large in the center of her chest, a recognition with no shape yet, like a name on the tip of a tongue, a woman who sat. Old church songs in the dark, a card on a nightstand in a blunt hand. A box, walnut branded on the bottom. She did not put it together, not yet. The mind protects you from the biggest things until you're standing close enough to survive them. But her hand had gone to her own chest without her telling it to. The way a hand goes to a wound it doesn't know it has. She did the only thing her mother had ever taught her was worth anything. She reached over and took the old man's hand, those big scarred hands that had cut a dovetail so tight you couldn't slide a hair through it, and she did not say it would be all right because she did not lie to people who'd been lied to enough. She just held it. From the other room where she was supposed to be asleep, Junie's voice came small and clear. The way children say the true thing the adults are working so hard around. Grandma, Junie called. Is he the one we're keeping now? Walter made a sound that was half a laugh and half the other thing. Hush, baby, Faye said, go to sleep. But she didn't let go of his hand. And on the shelf above the radiator, in the dark, the box waited for the morning. It would finally be opened by the only 2 people in the world who could read what was written on the bottom. Friday came and Faye did not clean around him. She came with the Corolla and a folded hand truck she borrowed from Tasha's husband, and she packed the few things in that bedroom that were actually Walter's. Not the staged lamp, not the listing photo throw pillows, but the cardigan and a shoebox of photographs and a leather case of chisels worn to the shape of one man's grip. And she put them in the trunk while Gail stood in the doorway saying the word arrangements in 3 different sentences. Faye said, yes, ma'am, to all 3. Then she helped Walter down the front steps with a hand under his elbow, and she put him in the passenger seat of a 2004 Corolla, and she drove him to a 1-bedroom apartment on Coleraine, where a 7-year-old was waiting with a drawing she'd made of a house with too many windows and a man in the doorway. Because Junie had decided things before the adults had finished deciding them. There was no plan. There was a pull-out couch and a second mouth and the math that had never once worked. Faye made it work the way she always had, in a place you couldn't see. That first night she put a pot of collard greens on the stove and a pan of cornbread in the oven, because a house that smells like food is a house, and she fed an old white-haired man at her small table and watched him eat like he'd forgotten he was allowed to. It was Saturday morning when the box opened them both. The light came in low and gray and Walter was up before Faye, the way the old are up before everyone, sitting in the kitchen in the cardigan with his hands around a coffee he hadn't asked for, and she'd left for him anyway. He was looking at the shelf above the radiator, the way you look at a thing your eye keeps returning to before your mind tells you why, and then his mind told him why. He stood. He crossed the small kitchen and reached up and took down the walnut box. He knew it in his hands before he turned it over. He knew the weight of it and the cool of the lid and the way the grain ran across the top like water under ice, because he had run his own thumb along that grain at his own bench 40s before. Choosing it from board, he'd saved 11 years for something he couldn't name. His thumb found the dovetails. Tight. He turned it over. B&S and the date. October's number burned into the wood by his own hand on the worst night of his life. Walter Banks stood in a stranger's kitchen and held the worst day of his life in two hands, and he understood, all at once and 14 years too late, where it had landed. Faye came in then, in her robe and her satin bonnet, and saw the old man holding her box, and the cold thing that had been growing in her chest since Thursday night finally took its shape. "You sent that," she said. "It wasn't a question either." "I sent it to 3 women," Walter said. His voice had gone very careful. "I never knew which one. I never knew if any of them was." He stopped. He looked at her the way you look across a great distance at someone you thought you'd lost. "It was you, the aide, the night shift. It was you." "I don't know what you—" "There was a young woman," Walter said. "A long-term place off Reading Road, 14 years ago, October. She was 31. She had a straight back. She couldn't talk by the end." He was not crying. He was past crying, into the still country on the other side of it. Somebody sat with her both nights, held her hand and hummed. "Old church songs," the nurse said. "I spent 14 years not being able to thank a person I couldn't find." And Faye, who had put the wondering down 9 years ago because she could not afford to keep paying it, felt the whole thing come back up through the floor of her, the room by the window, the propped pillows, the card on the nightstand in a man's blunt hand. She had read that card 100 times over for fits because there was nothing else to read. She had never told a soul. There was no soul to tell. "There was a card," Faye said slowly. "On the nightstand, your writing," it said. She closed her eyes and the letters came up the way the songs came up, from a place under thinking. It said, "Back Saturday, hold on, Dad." The coffee cup was very loud when Walter set it down, because his hand had stopped working right. Nobody else on earth knew about that card. Not Russell, not Gail, not the nurse. He had written it alone in a bright, cruel hospital room and propped it where she'd see it and flown to another state to be right about 41 paychecks. The card had not been in any file. It had not been in the box. It existed in exactly 2 minds, and one of them had stopped 14 years ago in a bed by a window, and the other was standing across the kitchen in a robe holding nothing, having just handed him the only proof in the world that she was the one. He stood perfectly still for 11 seconds. 11, the same number as the days he'd had left in a house that was no longer his, though neither of them was counting that yet. Then his face came apart. Junie wandered out in her socks, drawn by the quiet the way children are drawn by quiet, and she looked at the old man with his face in his ruined hands, and she looked at her grandmother, and she said the thing the adults had been building so carefully around. "Did somebody find their person?" Junie asked. "Yeah, baby," Faye said. Her own voice had gone somewhere. "Somebody found their person." Walter Banks cried for the first time in 14 years, standing in a 1-bedroom apartment that wasn't his, in front of a woman he'd been searching for since before he lost everything else. It was not the way grief sounds in movies. There was no swell to it. It was the sound a thing makes when it has been holding a great weight for a long time and is finally, carefully, allowed to set it down. A low, broken, almost embarrassed sound, the sound of a man who had taught his own brother that words were free and therefore worthless, learning in real time that the most expensive thing he would ever own was a sentence he hadn't been able to say to a stranger 14 years ago. "Thank you for sitting with my girl." Faye did not tell him it was all right. She crossed the kitchen and she did the thing her mother taught her, the only thing she had ever believed was worth anything. She put her arms around the old man and she held him the way you hold something that has already been broken and reglued and broken again, carefully, all the weight in your forearms, and she let him shake. "You were there," he said into her shoulder. I was in a conference room. You were the one who was there. I held her hand, Faye said. She had a good grip right up to the end. I want you to know that. She held on to me like she meant it. Money is the only apology that doesn't argue back, Walter said, and it came out of him like a tooth, like a thing he was finally pulling free. I've been saying that for 14 to my brother, my sister. I taught it to them, and they used it on me. It's a lie, Faye said gently. You knew it was a lie when you cut every one of those dovetails by hand. A check don't take 3 nights to make, you knew. Walter laughed, wet and ruined. I knew. The radiator ticked. Junie had gone back to her drawing and was adding to the house with too many windows, a small square thing on a shelf that the adults would not understand for another hour. Walter Banks was sharp that morning, and the next and most mornings after, because grief that finally lands gives something back, a reason to be early again. He called a lawyer. Not the lawyer who had slid pages across a kitchen table, not Gail's man with the soft handshake. He called Yolanda Brooks, who had drawn up the company's papers back when Claire was alive and the desk by the window had 2 coffees on it, and who had wondered for 3 years why Walter Banks had gone quiet and let his brother run a thing their father had named for him. She came to the apartment on Coleraine with a banker's box of files and sat at Faye's small table and listened to an old man who for the first time in years could finish his own sentences. What she found was not complicated, the way these things are never as complicated as the people doing them need to believe. There was the power of attorney, signed when Walter was tired and grateful and didn't read it. But a power of attorney is not a license, it is a duty. It says you act for the person, not for yourself, and the law has a plain old word for what Russell and Gail had done with it: self-dealing. The deed that had walked across town into Gail's name for almost nothing. The company shares that had moved to Russell at a price a court would call a kindness to no one but Russell. There were signatures from months when 3 different doctors had Walter on record, as sharp at dawn and capable of his own affairs. There were, in short, 11 days of paperwork it would take to begin unwinding 14 years of tidying. Yolanda laid it out plainly, the way the truth gets laid out by someone who isn't trying to sell it. You can challenge all of it, she said. The deed can likely be set aside. The transfer of the company can be examined, and given the doctor's notes and your capacity, the county's adult services people will want to look hard at how this was done. I won't lie to you, Walter, if a court sees what I'm seeing, your brother and your sister are not going to have a comfortable year. That's not me. That's just where the road goes once you put it in front of a judge. Walter sat with that for a while. He looked at the box on the shelf. He looked at the drawing on the refrigerator, the house with too many windows. I'm not going to ruin them, he said finally. That's your call. There's a version where... I'm not interested in the version where I win, Walter said. I had a version where I was right. I went to a deposition on a Friday to be right. I'm done being right at people. He folded his hands, the carpenter's hands, on Faye's table. Here's what I want. I want the deed back, because that house was Eleanor's and it was Claire's and it is not Gail's to sell to a stranger. I want the shop building. The original one in Camp Washington, the 2 bays. Russell can keep the company and the contracts and the name on the trucks if he wants them so badly his soul went looking for them. I just want the building where I made things. And I want the county to know what happened, not so my family gets punished, but so the next old man it happens to has a paper trail somebody believed. Yolanda wrote it down. The county would do what the county did. Consequences, once you set them loose, do not ask the victim's permission about how far to go, and Russell and Gail would spend that year the way Yolanda promised, in lawyers' offices and a probate hearing and a long cold quiet between a brother and a sister who finally had to look at what they'd told themselves was mercy. But none of that was Walter's hand. He turned away from it the way Faye had turned away from a daughter's insult 14 years before, back straight, eyes dry, and he never once knocked on their door to watch them fall. Then he turned to Faye, who had been standing at the counter the whole time pretending to wipe a clean spot, the way she'd watched her mother pretend to scrub a clean pot. I have a thing to offer you, Walter said, and I need you to let me finish before you say no, because I already know you're going to say no, and you're going to say it for the right reason, and I'm going to need you to be wrong this once. Faye put down the rag. I'm not offering you a handout, he said. I learned that lesson the expensive way. I'm not going to write you a check, because a check is what a coward sends into the dark. I'm offering you a building, and a job that is real and that you will be very good at, and a roof that you pay for with that job like anybody else. There's a shop in Camp Washington that's going to open its doors again, and it's going to teach a trade to people the world looks straight through. And somebody is going to have to run the front of that house, greet them, learn their names, be the one who's there, decide who we say yes to. He almost smiled. I've been making furniture for 60 years and I still can't do the part where you sit with a person. You can. You did it for my daughter when I couldn't. I'm not paying you for that, That can't be paid for. I'm asking you to do it again on the clock this time. At a wage I'd be ashamed to say out loud after what you've been living on. I don't take what I haven't earned, Faye said. It was reflex. It was 47 years of a sentence in a kitchen in Avondale. You earned it in October 14 years ago, Walter said. I've spent that long trying to pay an invoice you didn't send. Let me stop. Not by giving you money, by giving you somewhere to keep being exactly who you already are. He looked at the refrigerator, the crayon house, the small girl. And there's a desk in the front office with a window. Junie can do her homework there. I'll buy 2 coffees in the morning. I've missed having someone to set the second one down for. Faye Coleman, who had never in her life asked for anything, stood very still for a long moment. What's the wage? She said. $26.50 an hour, Walter said. And health insurance. And the building has a unit upstairs that needs a tenant who'll actually fix the radiator, and I happen to know one. That's too much. Measure it twice, Walter said. It's exactly right. My father taught me how to tell. Russell came to the shop once, in the second week of September, after the letters had started and the county had begun asking its careful questions, and the comfortable year Yolanda had promised had begun to arrive on schedule. Walter was at the bench sharpening a chisel he didn't need to sharpen. He heard the door and he knew the walk before he turned, the way you know a brother's walk after 73 years of it. Russell stood inside the door in a good coat, and for a moment the 2 old men just looked at each other across a concrete floor that one of them had poured in 1968. You could have just called me, Russell said. You didn't have to bring the county into it. I know, Walter said. They're going to take the company apart now. You understand that. Everything I built running it. Over a deed in a building you weren't even using. I'm using it now. Russell's jaw worked. And then, because the very old sometimes say the true thing the way children do, after a lifetime of building so carefully around it, he said the thing that had been under all of it. It was always your name, 60 years. His name was your name. I sold every contract in 31 states and the truck still said your name. His voice cracked on a word and he hated it. I just wanted something with my hand on it, once. Walter set the chisel down. He looked at his younger brother, the boy he'd carried on his shoulders at their father's grave, and he did not say it's all right, because it was not all right, and he did not say I forgive you, because forgiveness that comes that cheap isn't worth the breath it rides out on. He said the only true thing he had. I went to a deposition the Friday my daughter died, Walter said, because I was sure being right was the same as being good. It took me 14 years and a stranger in a robe to learn it wasn't. I'm not going to teach you that lesson by taking everything you've got. The county's going to do what the county does, and I won't stop it, because the next old man deserves the paper trail. But I'm not going to stand in a courtroom and watch my own blood answer for it. I had enough of being right at people to last me. He picked the chisel back up. If you ever want to learn to cut a joint by hand instead of selling one, there's a bench open. It's the only door I've got left to offer you, Russell. I can't give you the name. It was never mine to give. Pop gave it to a thing, not to a man. Russell stood there a while. Then he left, and he did not take the bench. And the year went the way Yolanda said it would, in offices and a probate hearing and a long cold quiet between a brother and a sister who finally had to look at what they'd called mercy. But Walter had said his piece with his back straight and his hands busy, and he never knocked on anyone's door to watch them fall. The Claire Banks workshop opened in Camp Washington on a Tuesday in October, in the 2-bay garage where it had all started in 1968, with the same concrete floor and a new sign and a smell of sawdust and oil that an old man said, the first morning, made the place finally feel like somewhere he was allowed to be again. It taught woodworking. Joinery mostly. The slow hand-cut kind that the machines had made unprofitable, and therefore, Walter said more important than ever, because the world had enough things made fast, and not enough things made to outlive the people who made them. The apprentices were people the world had learned to look through. A man who'd done 9 years and come out to no one waiting. A woman who'd cleaned offices at night for 2 decades and wanted just once to make a thing instead of erasing the marks people left. A kid aged out of the system with good hands and no one to tell him so. In its first year the shop took in 9 of them. Walter taught the chisel the way his father had taught him, an hour of sharpening before you're allowed to cut, and most mornings you could find him bent over a bench with a hand on a younger hand, saying measure it twice in a voice that had gotten its bottom back. The first one through the door was a man named Darnell, 51, who had cleaned the floors of an office tower on 4th Street for 19 years on the overnight shift and had never once in all that time made a thing, only erased the marks other people left, emptied the bins of other people's days, gone home at 6 a.m. invisible to a city that did not know his name. He came to the shop because a flyer had been left by Faye in a break room she still knew how to find. and tucked into the corner store window and tacked to the board in the church basement where the men's group met on Wednesday. His hands shook the first week the way the very careful shake. Walter put him on a simple box, walnut, dovetailed, and stood over him for 11 days, and on the 12th Darnell cut a joint so tight you couldn't slide a hair through the seam. And he held it up to the light and turned it, and he did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Nobody's going to throw this one out." And Walter, who understood exactly what 19 years of emptying bins does to a man's idea of what he's worth, said, "No, they're not. They're going to keep it long after both of us are gone. That's the whole point of doing it by hand." Darnell teaches the evening section now. Faye ran the front. She learned every name before she learned anyone's story, because she'd decided long ago that a person should be a person to you before they're a problem you're solving. She brought in the mail. She lined up no one's pills, but she noticed who came in not eating and made sure there was something hot by 10. A pot of greens, cornbread, a sweet potato pie on Fridays that was gone by noon. She was paid 26.50 an hour, and she paid rent on the unit upstairs like anybody. And on the first of every month she put the check in Walter's hand and watched him pretend to be put out by the formality, and they both knew it was the most precious arrangement either of them had. Two people who had spent their whole lives doing the right thing where no one could see, finally doing it somewhere with the lights on. On the shelf in the front office where every apprentice passed it on the way in, Walter set the walnut box. He turned it bottom out so the brand showed B&S and the date. When a new one asked about it, and they always asked, eventually, the way you ask about the one object in a room that's clearly holding something, Faye would take it down and let them hold it, and she'd say only this: "A man made this the night he couldn't say thank you. It took 14 years to get where it was going. So if you've got a thank you in you that you don't know how to say yet, you've got time, but don't take 14 years. Say it while the person can hear you." Then she'd put it back, bottom out, and go greet whoever was at the door, because somebody had to be the one who was there. And she had always her whole life been the kind that shows up. Junie did her homework at the desk by the window. She was 8 now. She had decided recently that she was going to make things when she grew up, and Walter had built her house so she could reach the low bench, and on it she made a small lopsided box with a lid that didn't quite close, and she gave it to Faye, and Faye keeps her own most precious things in it now, the lopsided one, because the tight one is on the shelf doing its job. Renee never came back. That story stayed the way it was. But Junie put a drawing on the workshop wall, a house with too many windows and too many people in the doorway to count, and underneath it, in the careful letters of a child who has been told she's the smartest person in a building of 41 units, she wrote, "This is where we keep people." Nobody took it down. If this story made you think of someone who showed up when no one was watching, a night nurse, a neighbor, a stranger who paid a debt that wasn't theirs and never signed their name, send it to them. Tell them you noticed. Don't take 14 years. Here is the question that splits the room. Walter never pressed a single charge against his brother and his sister. He took back the deed in the shop and he let the rest go, and he never once stood in a courtroom to watch them answer for what they did to him. Some people will call that grace. Some people will call it letting them off easy, leaving the next old man unprotected because one good man couldn't stand the sound of his own blood being punished. So tell me, and be honest, if it were your family who'd done it, who'd cleaned out your father while calling it mercy, would you forgive them and walk away clean like Walter did? Or do some debts have to be paid in front of a judge where everyone can see? Leave your answer below. I read them, I really do. The people in this story are fictional, and any resemblance to real people, living or dead, is coincidental. There's a line in this one I keep coming back to. It's not the big one. It's something Faye's mother says over a pot that's already clean. Wrote it early, then I almost cut it 3 times. It felt too plain. I kept it because plain was the point. Here's the thing. I'm at the age where the people who showed up for me are getting old. I don't always know what to say to them. I tell them I'll call. I don't, sometimes. That's the truth. If you're hearing this late, after a shift nobody clocked, I think you know the line before I say it. Maybe you're the night aide on hour 11 of a double. Maybe you're the one sitting up with someone whose breathing keeps changing. I wrote Faye for you. I'm not sure I got her right. I tried. I'll be back next week with another one about somebody the world keeps walking past. Walter and Faye aren't real. The city is. The rest I made up. But the line her mother says is the one thing I'd ask you to carry out of here tonight. You don't get to choose who you're kind to. You just choose to be the kind that shows up.